Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum and to our opening webinar series in partnership with my former colleagues at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, also known as OCCRP. If you don't know yet, I'm Stella Roque, Director of Community Engagement at the International Center for Journalists in Washington, D.C. Joining us today from OCCRP Partner Center RISE Project in Romania are award-winning investigative reporters Poenariu and Andrei Ciurcanu, who are going to walk us through two incredible investigations done during the pandemic concerning a no-bid contract by a shady supplier resulting in the distribution of masks of questionable quality to Romania during the pandemic. We will give you guidance on how to report on organized crime and go undercover safely. Their reporting has contributed to Romania's anti-corruption directorate charging the CEO of a state-owned company, Unifarm, for soliciting an $860,000 bribe from a firm in exchange for a major contract to supply Romanian hospitals with millions of poor quality masks, in addition to thousands of medical gowns sold to the state company for a markup of over 100%. A reminder to the people tuning in, if you have questions during this discussion and walkthrough, please post them on the Zoom chat or in the comments of the Facebook live stream. Once we walk through the stories, we will be taking questions from you. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Let's talk about this first story, which got you started figuring out where the masks came from. And I'm going to share my screen, in fact. And just so all our participants know, these stories are published in English on the Crime, Corruption, and Coronavirus project on OCCRP.org if you want to check these stories out there, or any of the others. Hold on one moment. I'm just trying, oopsie, that's not what we wanted to happen. Logistics. There we go. So we're going to start by walking through this first story. This is the Convicts and Coronavirus, Romania's million mask mess. And this is the first story that began the saga of looking into the mask supply coming into Romania and some of the interesting characters, including a convicted criminal involved in what amounted to a very shady deal. And as you mentioned to me, Anna, in a call, when the pandemic started, the Romanian government began to make it more difficult for journalists to access information such as public procurement data. And what you had to do was a good amount of traditional field work. So how did you first get the tip for the story?
It all started from a friend of mine who works in a hospital somewhere in Romania. Mm-hmm. This friend sent me a picture with some boxes of masks. He was telling me that the doctors that are working in the hospital are complaining about the quality of the mask, that they are always breaking and basically they cannot use them. So everything started from some pictures with some boxes of masks. Mm-hmm. And it was really hard to do it because, as you said, there was no access to information. Like one of the first things that our government did was to restrict access to information during the crisis situation. Basically, they issued a decree saying that if you file a FOIA request, you'll get information in 60 days instead of 30 days as you usually do in Romania.
Mm-hmm. And without access to any of the procurement data, how did you begin figuring out the origins of where the masks actually came from?
If you see the picture with the box of masks from OCCRP website, you will figure, like, can you go back on the OCCRP site?
Can do. Hold on a moment.
Yeah.
There we go.
You'll see that it's HG mask. So I just started Googling it and I came across to a Facebook profile. Mm-hmm. Not Facebook, sorry, Instagram profile. Yeah.
So this one here?
Yeah. So I managed to see that there's a website, there's the phone number, and the same pictures of the box I had, you know. Mm-hmm. And then because we didn't have access to information, I started looking in the phone and remembering who might help me in doing this investigation. So I contacted some old sources in the customs, and I asked them if they have any data about imports from this specific producer, which is Turkish. And then I got bills, yeah.
Are they bills of lading, basically? Is that what they are?
They are like, in the story, there's an intermediary, a company that had no activity before the pandemic. So the first thing that I got were some bills between the Turkish producer and the intermediary. Mm-hmm. And then documenting the story on the internet with free tools. Like I used a lot Google operators, which anybody can use. I managed to see that this type of masks were bought by Unifarm, mm-hmm. the state company that's involved in the business.
And what tipped you off that during your investigation that something shady was going on? Like, what made you realize this isn't quite right?
I knew the importer company, the intermediary company. Can you go down on the
story?
Sorry, yeah.
We have this.
Yeah, the pictures with this block. This was the address of a company who was importing masks of millions of euro, because mm-hmm. they had only one contract, one bill of purchasing masks from Turkey. The second picture shows exactly the flat where the company is registered. So you have clothes in the window, you have something on the window. So how come a company that's based in this flat can make imports of such amounts of money? So this tipped me off and kind of demonstrated to me that there's a real story behind the boxes of masks, you know.
So as you went through your investigation, and the story is really incredible, you identified a woman in your story. Now, I might be mispronouncing her name, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. Is it Simona Ciurcanu?
Yeah, it's okay.
Who had connections to organized crime and also to politicians in Romania. How did you establish those connections? And I'm going to show everyone a photo of Simona. So yeah. There you go. That is Simona. Tell us about Simona.
Simona Ciurcanu became a shareholder in this company that was involved in the deal a few days before the emergency state situation that was declared in Romania. I just used again Google operators and then went to the company register in Romania and saw what happened in that company. We even paid for some documents from the commerce registry. And I managed to find the connection to the Prime Minister of Romania. Our Prime Minister used to work in the Ministry of Transport and in the mayor house of Bucharest. So it was just a coincidence that Simona Ciurcanu kind of moved from the mayor house then to the Ministry of Transport. So we found her in two places connected to the Prime Minister. And then we consulted the justice portal in Romania and saw that she was convicted for this connection with the criminal gang in Bucharest. So the whole picture regarding her was clear. Moreover, we found her Facebook profile. Can you show the pictures with her, please?
Yes, absolutely. They're up.
I don't see them.
Oh, you don't see them. I definitely put them up on my screen share. Hold on a moment. Let me see. Maybe I just need to reshare the screen because it's a not separate thing. Here we go. So that's Simona.
Yes.
Yes. So when doing our stories, we basically check everything that's on internet. So we also checked social media. And we found pictures with her and with her lover and so on. So we already have the complete profile of the woman that was involved. She was the shareholder of the company that imported the masks and delivered them to Uniform.
Wow, that is incredible. And also just to find out all that information as well from like the justice portal, just to run her name and see like if there are any court cases against her, prosecutions. Now, this story eventually led you, I'm gonna just open up a second screen here, eventually led you to this second story where you did follow up on the first story. And this is really fascinating because you actually went undercover. And basically, you know, this second story involves you basically determining the players involved in the trade of these black market masks. And you found dealers, in fact, with ties to organized crime in Romania. And this story starts with you at a gas station undercover before meeting up with a man who has like quite the history. You know, in the story, the nickname is Manu the Bomber. And according to your story, he was convicted of beating a member of the Romanian Secret Service with a chair in a restaurant. And he's the son-in-law of a man known as the Loan Shark. So I take it this must have made for like quite the incredible meeting. Before you even got to the point that you were at a gas station undercover, what led you to Manu? What follow-up reporting did you do from that first story before you identified the person you were going to meet undercover?
We received several messages from different people after the first story. And one of them was really pushy, not pushy, let's say really, his arguments were really strong. So I went meeting the person and then it just happened. He introduced us into these deals.
And Andrei, do you also have like some things to add to that based on your experience working with
Yes.
Anna?
Well, the thing is that the main source with whom Anna was in contact after her first piece got our attention because this person was really documented and provided really interesting information because you know the legislation is it's sometimes misinterpreted, it's sometimes shady, and there are some different kind of products which are placed on the market. Some of them fall under the directive because you know Romania it's a country in the new European Union. We have a legislation and we need to follow the European legislation also and to apply it. Some equipments were placed in the markets as PPE, as a personal protective equipments. Some of them were placed on the market according to the directive of medical equipment. And what was interesting about this source was that he provided some information saying that what the organized crime units are doing is that they are providing certificates of PPE to equipment which does not fulfill the requirements of the European legislation. After we've got in contact with the primary source, we basically build up a cover because you know it's impossible to do an undercover story if you don't build yourself a really good cover. And when I say good, it doesn't mean that it has to be complicated, but it has to be really simple. We decided to pose as businessmen who were interested in buying the masks to resell them to hospitals and care units. We used this cover because it was normal those days. Everyone was trying to make loads of profit selling and reselling the face mask. So basically when we've got to the gas station, because I think this was your question, what led to discovering Manu the Bomber. When we first arrived in the gas station, we had no idea with whom we are going to negotiate with, but we had all the elements, as in how the industry is working, what are the price of the masks on the market. Basically, we can say we were bulletproof from this perspective, as in we were posing as businessmen. We knew how the market was developing. We knew how to negotiate, and it was really easy to do an undercover in two persons because from my experience is a bit difficult, but we managed to because me and Anna, we are really good friends.
Mhm.
So we had a really good chemistry together.
So now here's something about like bulletproofing going undercover. Now, RISE Project is a high-profile journalism organization in Romania, and you, Andrei, you've been a TV journalist. You know, RISE has taken down the country's most powerful politician and among other power players. Were you ever concerned about being recognized while undercover? Like, how did you mitigate that risk?
Well, this time, let's say that we were lucky because of the state of emergency. We were forced to use the masks. Okay,
Uh-huh.
so we were doing undercover for the mask, and we were bulletproof because of the masks. So, but in so many cases, yes, I worked in a TV for 7 years. So let's say that some people who are viewers of that specific TV station, maybe they recognize me. But again, if you believe your cover, then if anyone just approaches me and say, okay, you are, and I'm like, no, I'm not. Who are you? So you have to pretend really good. You have to be a really good actor when you're doing undercover, and you have to believe your cover so much that when you do, as in when I was with Anna, we were businessmen. We were reporters, but we really believed that we were businessmen, and we were interested in the business, and we were following the business, because as long as we had all the elements of this business put together, we would have, after the meeting, all the elements to do the investigation, which we did.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to, be really straightforward and say no or yes on,
Yeah.
But
Now,
every time it happens sometimes, but I avoided it doing, I don't know, it just came into your mind. When you do a lot of undercover thing, it comes naturally.
and Anna, do you have anything to add to that? Because, for example, before you actually went undercover, there was a lot of pre-planning done, not just to make sure you weren't recognized, but also like how to answer, your subject's questions if they doubt you, and also in terms of security. Could you explain a bit about that process and the details that went into going undercover?
First of all, we rented an expensive car. We had to show that we are rich. Then we had another team, colleagues of ours, following us by car. And also we shared location all the time. Sharing location when you do an incognito is really important in order for your colleagues to know where you are. It's good for your safety, actually. And what I remember is that we didn't spoke a lot. We let the guy to speak. They were bragging about all the kind of businesses they were doing. And basically their bragging brought us to recognize them. Like, we used again social media to recognize them and to be able to write their names down. But the most important thing is in doing incognito is to let others know where you are. I wouldn't go on incognito by myself, ever.
Mm-hmm. So you definitely had another group of colleagues and reporters following you, having like real-time access to your GPS location at all times while you were doing this work. Now, how did you manage, how did you plan, if your subject of your story had suspicions of you, how did you plan addressing those suspicions? Maybe Andrei, you could expand a bit about how you plan that.
Well, you always, when you're doing an undercover and you negotiate with someone, you need to know what that someone is interested in. So that person with whom we were negotiating, their interests were to sign the contract. Mm-hmm. So in case our cover was blown or semi-blown, I think the most safest way to get out of that situation was to play along the role. And to say, if you don't want the business you don't want to sign a contract, it's no problem, but you will lose the money. Mm-hmm. As in, you want to make a business or not? You are selling masks. I have the money. We are having the money. We want to buy the masks. So where is the problem? This is the safest way. You need to identify what that person is interested in getting from you. using this kind of, it's not very complicated psychology. It got me from different, dangerous situations when I was negotiating, for example, organs from, organized crime units who were, in the business.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, but it's difficult to explain because it comes with field and with experience. But what I had in mind was that you need to sign the contract. If you don't sign the contract, then it's okay. It's not a problem. Because at that point, when you're basically doing an undercover, but you're not exposing the person, you're not a threat to that person, except you become aggressive, violent. This is another thing that you as a reporter needs to be always chill, relax, to pay respect to the individual with whom you're negotiating, to treat them with, to play polite, be as articulate as possible, because you are there to do the business. Yeah, you're not there to point fingers. You're guilty or not guilty. So.
And when it comes to the subject of respect, I mean, this person has like quite the history, especially that point that, you had found out after the fact that he had used beat a Romanian Secret Service officer with a chair at a restaurant. Now, for the reporters who have never reported on organized crime at all, I mean, for those who might be a bit like nervous, they're interested in doing this kind of work, but they might be a little bit afraid because, I mean, we're talking about relating to and dealing with people with criminal records. What do you have to say generally about the psychology of the organized criminals who are the subjects of your story? Who, I mean, when you end up like meeting an organized criminal, like what is it that you can expect? You told me that respect was very important. Could you, or maybe Anna, expand a bit about that subject of respect?
Well, I can add, and after that I will leave Anna to add to it. I'll be honest with you. I was a bit of impressed because Manu the Bomber was a really articulate man. He was, I would not say, he was polite. He was talking with us very polite. He invited us. He was not a bully. The big difference between these guys when they are negotiating with people from a different kind of, level of society, and the way they are dealing between themselves, it's like this. So if they are violent, they will become violent if you're violent. So they are aggressive and they talk dirty among themselves. And when they, when they meet the competitors, or when they have a problem inside their organized crime unit, but when they deal this kind of negotiations with people that they do not know and and sometimes they do not understand, they play this, polite role, because again, their interest is to convince you to buy their products. So. Yeah.
And Anna, do you have any other sort of point of view to add to this whole process?
The most important thing regarding this incognito is that we believed in the story. Like, we never had doubts that we are businessmen. So the guys we met reacted accordingly to our reactions to them. We were like, at a moment I said I was a little bit pissed off, let's say, because we were moving from one gas station to another gas station and so on. And I was like, oh, come on, another gas station. So you really have to believe the story and play your role, and to always keep in mind that you are doing this for the public to know what's happening, because the public was buying masks in order to protect against COVID, right? So the public interest was there. When you believe it, it just turns good,
Mm-hmm. Now, OCCRP network has a very specific specialization in reporting on organized crime. For reporters who have never done this kind of work before and may be interested, what are some pieces of advice on the process of reporting on criminals, actually in the actual publication of a story, to keep them safe? For example, how did you decide whether you would publish your bylines or not? When you write the story about criminals, how do you go about putting together that story and publishing it so that the criminal doesn't get upset that you've just, exposed them?
We had a little debate on if to publish our bylines or not, but in the end we decided to do it because the current situation in Romania is not so complicated like in other countries, and in fact exposing basically ourselves by publishing our names near the article offered us protection. This is my belief. I don't know, Andrei, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. We had some talks before publishing the bylines, because at one point, even though we did not recognize at first Manu the bomber, I recognized the driver of the guy, and I was a bit surprised to see him there, because I've met him in some other situations. But like Anna put it, it really depends from country to country. And I believe that the most important thing when publishing a story is, what is the purpose of an investigative platform? Is to keep the journalist safe, to be able to publish another 100 stories like this big investigation. So if the team considers that it poses personal risks, then one can decide that should be better to not to credit the story. But in this case, as Anna said, again, I'm referring to what Anna said. Romania is not Mexico, for example.
Mm-hmm. And the information,
it's not Russia. It's not Russia.
Yeah.
Even though we have really big problems with organized crime units, they're not that kind of.
It's not that as risky as some other countries when you're doing risk assessment, right? Now, the information in your stories, especially the evidence you gather, is quite valuable to a lot of institutions, such as law enforcement and prosecutors. I've always admired OCCRP Network's fact-checking process, that every story published can stand before a court of law. Do you publish the evidence you find publicly? How publicly available is the evidence that you gather for these stories? And are there types of evidence that you won't publish? Why or why not? Maybe Anna, you can tackle this question.
In Romania, we have a platform. We are working for RISE Project Romania, which is an investigative platform, mm-hmm. Which is a center member of OCCRP. Mm-hmm. So on RISE Project, we do publish evidence, documents, and so on. But at least I always, that's not us.
Yeah, I just saw that.
That's wrong. That's wrong.
That's something else. There we go. Oh, no. Wait, no, still not you. Wait, what's happening here?
It's the fourth one.
It's the fourth one.
Yeah.
From up to bottom. Yeah. That one. Exactly.
Wait a minute. There we go. Found it.
So on RISE Project's website, we always publish evidence regarding the stories we are publishing. Moreover, we also keep folders with proofs. Not all the documents or the papers or so on are published due to protecting our sources. For example, I always agree with my source, can I publish this or not? Because otherwise you can lose your source.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think now at this point of our discussion, we're going to take some audience questions, because we have a lot of reporters here who definitely have questions. Let me just go through this. Let's see. I'm just going to check which ones are the best questions here. So there's someone named Amina who asks, are you afraid about the repression of your stories and the impact to your security when you publish your stories?
I would reply that sometimes,
mm-hmm.
But again, we decide if the story credited poses a risk a risk or not. But again, in this case, well, let's put it this way: the organized crime is as much powerful as the journalists and authorities allows them to, you know. So if you have the courage to fight against organized crime with the tools that, you know, journalism offers you, then you are more protected in some cases if you publish the byline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because that will raise awareness. Something happened to that guy. Well,
Mm-hmm.
why? Because he just published a piece. So
yeah, and I remember that after we published the incognito investigation, for 1 week I was like receiving messages and calls from the guys involved. But you can always I don't know, take another number and put that phone with the new number that you are using for the investigation on mute in order not to be disturbed, because otherwise you can go crazy. But I didn't, during this investigation, after the most I think the most stressful moment of the investigation was when we discovered who are the guys involved in.
Yeah, and then you had to take steps after, like once you discovered, oh my, we just met with organized criminals,
Exactly.
you know, like.
and we also had a moment when we met at a second place with another guy with whom we negotiated. And at one point, he asked us about the financials of the company, and we backfired, saying that we don't have the documents with us, and that you know, we are not going to pay in advance because we had some crazy history with some other people with whom we negotiated, and we've lost 15,000 euro. And the guy with whom we were negotiating was like, tell me the name of that company and I will give you the money in 2 days. And we were like, oh, okay, so with this kind of people we are negotiating. So basically he was saying that, you know, we will find that company and we will get you the money using the, you know, our ways.
Yeah, he was saying, from what I remember, he was saying that he can find anybody in Romania. Don't be afraid, I'll get you back the money. And he was asking, I think I remember he was asking for a percent of the money or something like that. It was like,
yeah. He was asking for an advance, 15% of the contract.
And at that point, you needed to sort of think on your feet in terms of responding to him, right?
Exactly. And at that point, we said we are paying in cash. We don't pay with credit, and we will pay when we see the merchandise. So when you will bring us the merchandise, we will bring you the money.
So you became,
and he was like, okay,
really hard businessman. Like you really
yeah. We
negotiated.
We negotiated the profits. We negotiated the number, documents. We also were, if I remember correctly, Anna, we were having, after 4 hours, we were having a meeting to sign the contract for the first million with Mano the Bomber. So everything was, you know, arranged, because again, we were businessmen and we were trying to buy the mask.
Yeah, there's actually a really good question here from George. He kind of asks about, is there a risk from law enforcement or government task forces who might be doing either the investigation in parallel, or when you publish a story, do law enforcement come to you to ask for the evidence from these stories? Or for example, in the United States, I'm sure you have this in Romania too, like with a subpoena to force you to hand all the information over to them, like even your journalistic sources. Like, have you ever had an incident like that before in the past? And if so, how did you address it?
So the prosecutors can ask you, but if they just ask you, then you're not obliged to give them the documents. And moreover, regarding sources, nobody can oblige us to name our sources. in Romania. In other countries might be different, but at least at this moment, there's no way that a prosecutors or a judge can oblige you to mention, to say the name of your sources. Regarding the documents, to me, it never happened. Like for a prosecutor to come to me to ask for documents, ever.
What about you, Andrei? Have you ever had that experience?
Well, I'm not going to disclose too many elements, but what I can say is that because RISE project publishes many documents which are not too sensitive, or documents that do not put in risk our sources, the authorities do not make a step forward to get the information. But it's not our job to feed the authorities. If you ask me, it should have been the authorities to investigate the way this phenomena evolved in Romania. And what I can say is that, unfortunately, even at this day, I'm not aware of a big investigation led by an authority in Romania to discover the criminals behind this phenomena. So, but you know, it happens. Sometimes maybe the authorities may, or the prosecutors or policemen, they try to to influence you, they try to put pressure on you. But in Romania, like Anna said, it's not mandatory to give the documents, and the secrecy and the confidentiality of the sources is something which is sacred. So I never ever, and I don't have it, it didn't cross my mind to ever share such sensitive data with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
We have, for example, in RISE project, Anna has some sources, I have some sources, and we keep these sources separate and confidential, not because these sources have to be kept secure, but because we are able to check and to verify some information that we provide and we get from sources. I can check my information using Anna's sources, and what I can say is that her sources are not in connection with mine. So it's something about security, but also about verifying and checking the information if it's bulletproof or not.
And moreover, there's a law in Romania which establishes how the prosecutors are constructing their case, meaning they have to file requests, official requests to other authorities and so on, for those documents to be used in court. They cannot use documents obtained in other way in court if there's not the legal process to obtain those documents. So yeah.
These kind of help offer you some protections as journalists, yeah, and not being forced to share documents or sources unnecessarily with authorities. Now, there's a question here from a journalist in Liberia. I believe she's looking into tax trails, like looking into officials who failed to pay taxes. And she says a lot of data isn't available. And similar to kind of your story on the procurement data, that, the government was kind of trying to limit what journalists could access in terms of public data. She kind of asked, like, what would you recommend in a country like Liberia, where there isn't access to public information as readily, for journalists doing either corruption or organized crime stories, or trying to look into politicians? For example, you started your story off with a tip.
Well, there are some ways. The safest and fastest way to obtain information about the character that you are following is to identify his enemy. His enemy in the authority, in the company that he's, or state authority, where is this guy working, or maybe he has some personal or professional conflicts. And the other way is to build yourself a network of sources. This is a bit difficult because when you don't have access to public information, then you need to go to dig using these sources that you've cultivated during your activity. And this discussion about sources and why do these sources share the information with journalists is, it's a never-ending story. But these are these are the two fast ways to obtain an information which is not public. Basically, you need to identify the weakness of that individual in terms of relationships with someone, because it's almost impossible to be a good Samaritan.
It's finding someone
at
who's
one
angry.
point, someone is angry with you, and if it's angry, maybe he will be able to deliver and to provide you enough elements and details to follow a thread that can take you to that specific story that you are interested in.
And there's a very good question here from Ranju. He said, how does one undertake investigative work or even undercover work in smaller regions or towns where everyone knows each other? And it's actually much easier to locate a new face. Like if you were to send someone new to the town, everyone would know that's a new person. He said, going undercover is not really an option when I'm bound to run into a cousin of a friend of an uncle sooner or later. What would you do in that situation?
Well, Anna, please.
If I'll run into a cousin or a friend during an investigation, I will not do that story and ask my colleagues to do it, because otherwise you kind of, you get me, you are not afraid, but due to your connection to that person, you might not put the right questions.
Yeah.
Because you have a personal relationship with that individual.
Yeah.
But if we don't consider the personal relationships, and if we don't get to that point, my advice would be to use someone out of the region. When I was a chief investigator for an NGO in Romania before joining OCCRP, we had some cases where it was impossible for me to go there. So I used trusted people who had skills, as in journalists or investigatives in the NGO field. And basically, I've trained them and teach them how to act, what to ask, and basically all the things that I was forced to do in order to do the undercover. So this way is the safest way, not to get discovered or
Mm-hmm. Now there's someone here who has a very specific question in regards to your stories. Svetlana asks, those masks you were talking about originating from Turkey, were they cleared by the customs in Romania or somewhere else on the territory of the EU? If you cross-check with the Turkish export declarations, you might be able to find the evidence for overvaluation. I take it you did find that evidence, correct?
Yeah. We basically had the bill done by the Turkish supplier to the Romanian intermediary, to the company that was led by Simona Ciulavu. We had the price which Uniform bought the masks from Simona Ciulavu. So there was a big difference. But we had custom documents, of course. What we also did is that we tried to get information from Unifarm. We called the director of the company. We also called the Turkish supplier, and that was it. Turkey is a hard country in order to get this kind of data, and in any European country, if you want to obtain custom documents like we obtain, you have to have great sources, and we didn't have anybody in Turkey. Like, we didn't have any connection there. At least I didn't have at that moment. But we had elements showing the difference of prices and so on. Even the price of the transport we had.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Excellent. I'm asking the audience here because I see we have 43 participants on this call. Does anyone have any more questions for Anna and Andrei, like regarding safety, going undercover, organized crime reporting? Oh, here, George has a question. How do you know if the information you got is genuine if everything is researched online, especially if we are quarantined and on lockdown because of the pandemic?
Well, we had we had the information that the Turkish supplier, the Turkish producer was producing the mask on the box, right? We found evidence on the Instagram profile, and of course we had to contact the owner of the Turkish company. So everything was confirmed regarding, let's say, pictures with Simona Ciurcanu and her involvement. We had company records showing that she's the owner. We checked with other sources if the pictures we found on internet with her are hers, like if she's pictured in those photographs. And we called her, of course. She didn't answer, but yeah. Like we didn't use only online information. We are always calling the persons. We are always trying to get more data from the authorities and so on. So we are not working only with online sources.
Well, I think at this stage it's important also to say that when we've identified the characters in our stories, we've used information provided from state authorities using our sources. As in, we've checked the license plate from the cars. We checked the Registry of Commerce, where you have all the details of the persons, you know, unique numeric code and so on and so forth. We've checked this information in the online. So it's in several ways you can verify if that information is genuine or not.
And moreover, stories at OCCRP and RISE projects are passing the fact-checking process, meaning that you have to have a proof, like real solid proofs for the quotes from your text. It's like if you don't have evidence, proofs for one quote, one phrase, the sentence goes out. So
yeah, and the fact checking is quite intense. It's every single line in the story. So that's, again, this is something I really admire about OCCRP network members. Those stories can stand up before a court of law. If anyone powerful tried to sue you, you can back up every single line in that story.
Exactly.
Let's see, Natalia asks, I think we kind of addressed this earlier, but I'll put it out there again for anyone who wants sort of a repeat answer on this. She asks, if my profile photos are on the internet and I have an internet profile, how could I go undercover? I think there was something you mentioned in our pre-call, Andrei, about how you would say not everyone is going to be able to find you online while you're undercover, right?
Now, it depends on situation to situation. The fact that your face is public doesn't mean that all the people in your country where you live know about you. So what you have to do is, when you go undercover, you need to be sure that the person with whom you are meeting are not connected to the social and professional environment that you are active in.
Yeah.
For example, you can check if the person with whom you're trying to meet undercover has any personal connection with friends of friends of friends, which is a bit difficult, but you need to do it to be sure that your story will be published and you will prevail in your quest, you know. So like, again, yeah. I don't have a straightforward answer. It really depends on the situation.
Maybe something for someone like you, because I thought this was a bit funny, like we were mentioning before this webinar launched, like if you're going undercover and someone looks at you, hey, aren't you that TV reporter in Romania? You know, like what's your like response to that?
This is not the first time that someone says that I look with that guy. You know, what's the matter with you? You know, you just make fun, and I was like,
you take it as...
yeah, and you just have to act calm and, you know, just react like, you know, I know, I've been told, yes, I know. but we are not here to discuss about me. We are here to discuss about the business.
Yeah.
So always go back to the main
motivation of that subject
exactly
of the story,
main
right?
motivation. Exactly, yeah.
And Sujata also asks like a good question. You know, like most of the time when we're doing journalistic work, you know, our ethics says that we reveal our identity as journalist people for the most part. And this person asks, like, did you ever at any point reveal your identity as journalists to the subject of your investigations as undercover work, or they only knew when the story was published?
I did in some cases, because I was forced to. At one point, I was attacked in the forest while I was doing an investigation on illegal cutting. So I was forced to do it because I was feeling under threat, and I thought that, and it was a good thought to say, okay, I'm a journalist. Maybe you should consider about your intentions. But in so many cases, as in 100% of the cases, we need to disclose our identity because we call and get in contact with the people with whom we did in undercover. So this is what we are doing for each and every story. It really doesn't matter if it's undercover or not. At one point, you have to give the opportunity to that character that you're investigating to give his opinion on that, despite the fact that you're having all the documents showing that he did this and that. So this is what we did for the story also. We contacted each and every person with whom we've met in the gas station, saying that, hello, my name is, I'm a reporter in RISE project. Some weeks or months ago, we negotiated in a gas station. And sometimes their reaction were, oh, you're a journalist. Yeah, okay. And they just hang up the phone. But, you know.
So basically in the process, at the very end of the story, you've done the undercover work, you've done the reporting, you've done the fact checking, you're just about to publish. And that's when you call up the subjects of the story, the ones that you met undercover, and you get a right of response from them, basically. Like they have a right to respond to the story.
Exactly.
And that's the point you tell them you're journalists.
Yes. Or in some cases, after you do the undercover, but now it depends on how the story unfolds, if you have all the elements or not, or if it's safe to, call the person. In Romania, it's mandatory after you do a hidden camera to call that person and to say that he was recorded using the hidden camera. So he needs to have his opinion on that. So it's mandatory.
That's good ethics as well and a very good practice.
Yeah, exactly.
And Anna, do you have anything to add to that?
I think it's this part with calling each person you have been in contact while in incognito. It's really important because otherwise you can get sued, you know, and instead of spending time doing other investigation, you are going to spend.
You will get sued.
Yeah. And instead of doing investigations, you might end up in court for years. So you don't want that. In order to avoid that, you are always contacting those person, and moreover, you do the fact checking that I was telling earlier. So, yeah, I think it's vital.
And there's another really good question here by Natalia. Now, I think she's a bit paranoid about the undercover work. She asks, but all someone has to do is take my photo and do a reverse image search of me. Couldn't the subject of my story do that? Like find my photo somewhere and reverse search it?
When you are meeting him, nobody will check your photo when you are meeting him, like just putting your photo on Google, because he will not have time to talk with you if he does that. It takes at least 5 minutes on the phone to do that.
Mm-hmm.
No, but the thing is that's why Anna and I said that when going undercover, you really need to believe your cover. And my question is to the fellow journalist who sent the question: why would someone with whom you're doing negotiation undercover would be interesting in searching for your photo if you're doing a good job, if your cover is bulletproof, and you're that businessman and you don't raise any suspicion? For your character is nothing but normal to do that kind of negotiation, because this is what he or she does. So as long as you are playing the role and no suspicion is raised, nobody would be interested in, in searching for you.
Exactly. No one's going to take a photo of you on the spot and reverse Google image search it. Now, this is actually another good question from Betty in Liberia. She asks, if you're going undercover, what's the best guide for family, and specifically for immediate family? She said, I've always been afraid for my children when conducting investigations. I remember they were threatened twice. Now, do you ever tell your family that you're about to go undercover or give them some guidelines of how to protect themselves? Are you ever concerned for like your own family members when you're doing this kind of work, and how do you mitigate those risks?
Well, for example, I don't have too many pictures with myself on Facebook. There are some pictures, some old pictures available online. And moreover, I'm not friends on Facebook or on other social media profiles with any of my relatives.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good tip. Andrei, do you have any others?
We go back to the discussion that we already touched. It really depends on country to country.
Exactly.
To be honest, I do not say to my wife when I'm going undercover, because she will be, but again, it depends. Not every undercover is dangerous. Let's put it this way. You can go undercover to do some, on a story on tax, and you need to identify someone who is doing business with someone. So not every organized crime group is aggressive. It depends on the business. If you go with organ trafficking, drug trafficking, these guys are, really crazy. If we go to real estate, for example, as in the white collars, these guys are not that kind of aggressive, as in terms of violence. So it really depends on how low you go on the scale of intelligence and education. The least educated you are, the more danger, as in physical danger, you're in, because this is my experience. So you can write an investigation and do an undercover for a story about a multi-billionaire who's doing a business of real estate in your country, and when you're doing that investigation, the guy is trained enough, educated enough to understand, okay, they got me, okay, what can I do? But when you're doing this kind of undercover with a drug trafficker, then it's a different kind of situation, psychology. That guy just doesn't think. He needs to sell his merchandise, and he will act accordingly if your cover is blown.
Yeah, and the white collars have a different kind of approaching. For example, in 2018, I think it was the most powerful political man in Romania, said to us that he was not involved in what happened to us. And what happened to us was that a public authority connected to him asked us to reveal the source of our investigations that were connected to him, of course. If not, they are going to give us a 20 million euro fine. Yeah. So it depends on the story. Yeah, Andrei was right saying that how low you go in education and in the culture, let's say, of the group, they have different types of approaching you and talking with you.
So I hope you don't mind if we go 5 minutes over, because there's one more good question here I definitely want to ask before we wrap up. And this question comes from Princess Ekwi Ajide. from the Anambra Broadcasting Service. So she wants to do a story on living conditions of internally displaced people in Nigeria during the pandemic. And she said journalists are not granted access into the internally displaced people camps. Now, in terms of going undercover, would there be a way to infiltrate that camp and do it in an undercover fashion?
Ooh, might be. I remember
Yes.
that. Yeah, I remember that. For example, New York Times published a story about how people were exploited in shrimps camps, and they didn't have access to those islands where they were collecting shrimps and cleaning them and packing them to deliver them to the whole world, like Europe and United States. I think that this was somewhere in Philippines or Thailand. I don't remember exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So what those guys from the New York Times did is that they found one of the guys that was visiting this place, this island, because they had to deliver goods like food for the people that were working there. So they found one of the guys that was delivering food there, and they put a hidden camera on him. So that's how the story was done. So you can always find ways, even if you are forbidden to enter a place, you can always find somebody that has access to that place. Even now, I'm working on a story that I think for 3 weeks already, and I asked for access in a special facility from a state institution, and they didn't let me in. But I got pictures and videos and so on. So
Excellent.
you can always do it. Yeah.
That's actually a very good piece of advice. Oh, well, that's like, okay, so one more question and then we're done. So Mirna asks, how do you pick a story? You have so many stories to cover. How do you decide which ones are the best ones?
When picking a story, you'll always have to take in consideration the public interest. Who is affected? Like, I don't know. I wouldn't go writing about, for example, a small street between some blocks, because that story would not have a great impact. Of course, it's important for those people living near the street, but it's not affecting a lot of people. So I always ask myself about the impact, like how many people are going to be interested. For example, if you're writing a story on the educational system, you think on how many kids we have in the school, right? So I always think about that.
Gotcha. And Andrei, do you have anything to add before we wrap up? Any final tips?
About the tips, I was thinking about the previous question. Maybe the fellow colleague can try to identify if in that care facility they need people to hire, so she can become an employee there. Or like Anna said, identify some nurse who is, you know, affected by what the things are, you know, the shady and the horrific things that are happening in that care unit. On what you've asked, Anna, it's all about the impact. But again, when you're talking about organized crime, you're talking about big numbers. And when you have big numbers, you have big losses, and you have a national or a regional impact. And
Exactly.
you know, there you go. The story unfolds because it's massive. And the mask story, it will be a never ending, because of the COVID and the pandemic times. We will see, you know, tens of stories of how the organized crime are, you know, trying to take profit out of the weakness or corruption of state authorities.
Yeah, and this is something that, I mean, if you are a journalist, regardless of what country you're looking into, these are the types of stories you should definitely be doing. Again, I encourage everyone here, the majority of you are English speakers, to go to www.occrp.org and check out their corruption coronavirus. Hold on, I'm going to get it wrong. Is it crime, corruption, coronavirus project, correct? And and read the stories there. And if you can do similar types of stories in your countries, we really do encourage it. And thank you so much, Anna and Andrei, for joining us today and offering us your pro tips on reporting on organized crime and going undercover during the pandemic. For everyone else who's joining us here, I want to remind you that on October 5th at 7:30 p.m. ET, we will be holding a tribute for our awardees this year. We're going to recognize CNN's Farid Zakaria for his thoughtful insights and expert analysis of the most important stories of the day. Our Knight International Journalism Award winner, founder and editor of Mada Masr, Lina Atala of Egypt. And of course, Russian reporter Roman Anin, who will receive the ICFJ Knight Trailblazer Award for launching a collaborative investigative news outlet called iStories in Russia, where sources of independent news are increasingly rare. Thank you again, Anna and Andrei. Please stay safe. And to everyone else joining us here, we'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.